Hi, my world history students. This is Mrs. Craven. I'm so happy to be talking to you guys. I miss you all already. We're going to try this non-traditional instruction, and it's going to be an adventure, and we're going to learn all about this together. But today I'm going to present to you a PowerPoint. Part of it comes from Dr. Dickens, who did a sermon on Martin Luther and the Reformation a couple years ago in chapel on the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses on the doors of his cathedral. And so we're going to go through this and yeah. So to talk about the Reformation, we really have to go back beyond and before Martin Luther. The Reformation was something that was beginning to happen, and the groundwork was being laid long before Martin Luther took the bold step that he took in 1517. So we want to start with looking at John Wycliffe. He was a British preacher who spoke out against the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church. Specifically, he criticized confessing to a priest and the practice of transubstantiation, which is turning the bread and wine into actual body and blood of Christ. He upheld the Bible as the supreme authority for all believers and initiated the translation of the Bible from Latin to English so more people could read its truths. He actually died of a stroke in 1384 before he was tried for heresy and convicted. So he actually died of natural causes. But put a pin in that because we're going to revisit John Wycliffe here in just a moment. The next person we want to talk about is Johann Huss. He was a follower of Wycliffe. He was called to the Council of Constance, where he was condemned as a heretic and sentenced to be executed. The same council formally condemned Wycliffe as a heretic, and because they had not had the satisfaction of executing him, they had his body dug up and burned his bones as symbolism that of their belief that Wycliffe was burning in hell. So they burned his bones just to symbolize the power of the church to declare people as heretics and then to actually execute them for those teachings against the Roman Catholic Church. So let's jump forward a little bit to 1514. Pope Leo X launched a campaign to complete the rebuilding and a remodel of the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Because the Renaissance popes, we know that some of the Renaissance popes were corrupt, and there was like a whole new round of church corruption during the Renaissance, but those popes drained the treasury. And Pope Leo X had to raise money. So he began to raise money for this remodel of this basilica by selling indulgences or pardons from sin and time off purgatory and opportunities to view religious relics or artifacts of Christian significance. So there's Pope Leo X. And this is an example of an indulgence. This is what they look like. It's a contract that basically says that the owner of this contract has time off purgatory. And in some cases, if they were wealthy enough and they gave enough money, they could completely forego purgatory. This is an example of some of the relics that we're talking about. This would have been the skull of one of the apostles, and you could pay a small fee to actually hold it in your hand or actually look at it. And in some cases, again, wealthy Europeans who could afford it could actually purchase some of these. And having these relics or even getting to see them or hold them in your hands, they believed had some kind of almost magical power to earn them time off of purgatory. So Martin Luther, that leads us to Martin Luther. He attended university and planned to become a lawyer. In 1505, he had a Damascus Road experience. He was caught in a storm and nearly struck by lightning. So he made a promise to God that if his life would be spared, he would enter the ministry. So God got him through. He lived and he kept his promise. He entered the monastery and in 1507 was ordained as a Catholic priest. He became a professor at Wittenberg University in Germany, and he was angered by the practice of selling indulgences, especially those of Johann Tetzel, who became an agent of selling these indulgences, and he kind of became a traveling salesman, selling these indulgences on behalf of Pope Leo X. So this is the picture of Wittenberg Castle Church. This is the church that Martin Luther pastored as a Catholic priest in Germany. And this is going to be the church where Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the doors of this Wittenberg Castle Church on October 31st, 1517. And here are the doors, the very famous doors. The 95 Theses were inspired by Luther's anger over the selling of indulgences, but were really just talking points to debate the issue. Overnight, the 95 Theses became a symbol of defiance against the corruption and hypocrisy of the Roman Catholic Church. So the German emperor, who was like the Holy Roman emperor, excuse me, who protected Luther because of his public support and all of the support that Luther was getting, this German emperor did not want to go against him because then he felt like people would turn on him. So he called Luther to the Diet of Worms, which is just a meeting of church officials and the political officials. And Luther thought that it was an opportunity to defend his beliefs in front of this council of priests and the clergy. But in the end, they demanded that Luther renounce his newfound faith and his support of this new look or new perspective. And Luther refused. And so rather than be convicted of heresy and executed, Luther fled. And actually he was taken by supporters to safety. And then not long after that, Charles V declared Luther an outlaw and actually put a price on his head, a bounty on his head. So Luther recognized that his failure to recant at the Diet of Worms had put him in serious danger. After his defiant confession of faith before the emperor, he was rushed away back to Wittenberg, but took a forced detour to Wartburg Castle, which was to become his secret hideaway for 10 months. It was during this time that Luther translated the New Testament from Greek to German so that it had a larger readership. And in Luther's absence, the young Philip Melanchthon had taken over the work of reform for Luther. In 1530, Melanchthon wrote the Augsburg Confession, which clarified the chief doctrines of Luther and his supporters. This document became the doctrinal standard for the Lutheran Church and remains the denomination's most respected statement of faith to this day. In Switzerland, Switzerland was one of the first places outside of Germany to be influenced by the Protestant Reformation. And in an ordained Catholic priest, Ulrich Zwingli, was an ordained Catholic priest, but outspoken about the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church. He became the priest of the largest church in Zurich, Switzerland. With the support of the Zurich City Council, Zwingli made sweeping changes to his church. Zwingli believed that the Bible was the sole rule of faith, declared that Jesus was the only way to salvation, and that Jesus was the only mediator between God and man. Zwingli was killed in the Battle of Kappel between the Protestants and Roman Catholics. And then John Calvin was another person who spread the Reformation ideas. Around 1533, Calvin, a university student in France, converted to Protestantism. He fled Protestant persecution in France to Switzerland, where he wrote one of the most significant and influential books on theology ever written, The Institutes of the Christian Religion. The heart of Calvin's theology is the belief in the sovereignty of God and in predestination. At the time of his death, Calvin was preaching at the church in Geneva, Switzerland, which became a safe haven for persecuted Protestants from all over Europe and a beacon of Protestant teaching that stretched throughout Europe and across the English Channel to England.